Good evening. My name's Nick Heath, and I'm speaking to you from the House of Croft in Portugal. Croft is the oldest company still active in the port trade. And we're at the wonderful old property of Quinta da Roêda, near the village of Peão, in the centre of the Douro Valley. There's an old saying that if the Douro were a golden ring, Roêda would be the diamond. And Roêda is certainly one of the most famous and one of the most prestigious of the port companies, of the port vineyards. It's a very old vineyard. It was planted just over 200 years ago in 1811, and we'll talk a little bit about the history in a moment. But just a piece of news, this is the last day of the harvest. The pickers did their last picking yesterday, and this morning we had the traditional ceremony of the entrega do ramo, when the pickers come and bring a ceremonial bunch of flowers, a decorated bouquet, which they give to the people of the Quinta. And then there's reading of poems which have been written about the harvest, and some dancing, and then everyone gets back into their vehicles and drive back home, and they're on their way home now. We're extremely lucky because you can probably see behind me that the clouds are gathering, and it looks as though it's going to rain. Hopefully we won't have to run under cover, and we'll be able to enjoy this lovely view of the vineyards. We don't like rain during the harvest time, so it's actually very lucky that it's come just after the last grapes are under cover. So that's what's been happening today. During the harvest, it's been an odd harvest in a way. We've had very low yields and not a lot of juice. The reason is that we had a very hot and dry summer, and so the grapes obviously have lower yields than would normally be the case. But the quality of the wine that we have made is absolutely exceptional. A huge amount of colour, a lot of density, wonderful aromas, good acidity, quite a lot of sweetness, as you would probably expect from a dry year. So we're looking forward to seeing the wines when they develop over the coming years. Now, a little bit about Quinta da Roêda. As I mentioned, it's a 200-year-old property. It's one of the most famous properties in the Douro. One of the characteristics of Roêda, it has an enormous amount of sunlight. And if you look over to my left, over the vineyards, you can see this wonderfully exposed hillside in full sunlight for most of the day, enormous amount of sunshine to ripen the grapes. And the wines of Roêda are wonderfully smooth, silky, and dense, wonderfully ripe fruit. These are very much the hallmarks of the Croft style. Now, one of the things about Roêda is it has quite a substantial proportion of old vineyards. There are three old vineyards. One is called the Benedita, which is up behind me, Fredura, which is wonderful old, and Galeria, two wonderful terrace vineyards down closer to the river. These three vineyards together represent about 15% of the production of the property. And their significance is that they were planted in the years following phylloxera. Phylloxera, as you probably know, is a small bug which attacks the roots of the vine, and in the mid-19th century it destroyed virtually all the vines in this part of the Douro Valley, including those of Quinta da Roêda. And these vineyards these old vineyards of Roêda were planted after phylloxera, when it was pretty much a clean slate, where you could start again, and they contain some very, very interesting new developments, which then became the foundation for vineyard plantation throughout the Douro afterwards. And specifically, they contain some varieties which were planted at the time, which are very, very drought resistant. And as we know, the climate is tending to change. The Douro Valley is getting hotter and drier, and the existence of these grape varieties, which include varieties like the Tinta Francisca and Tinto Cão, the existence of these varieties makes these old vineyards extraordinarily resilient to the changes in climate. For those of you who are interested in very rare wines, I brought along a bottle of something called Quinta da Roêda Syracuse. This is a very rare vintage port, which is made only from the fruit from these old vineyards. It's quite a rare wine. Only about 3 pipes or 3 barrels, if you like, of this wine were made, And it's absolutely extraordinary. It's the kind of quintessence of the character of these wonderful old vineyards. Now, why Serikos? Well, the classicists among you will know that Serikos is the ancient Greek word for silk or silky. It describes the character of the Roêda wines, which are wonderfully silky, soft and smooth. But it also has a historic significance because after phylloxera, when the vineyards were had been devastated by the bug, the owners of the property decided that it would be prudent to look for other crops to grow on the estate. And they decided to grow mulberry trees. The mulberry tree, as you probably know, is the favorite food of the silkworm. And so the principal production of Quinta de Roêda at the time was actually silk. And had we not discovered the solution or the cure for phylloxera, today, instead of standing in front of you or sitting in front of you with a bottle of vintage port, I might have been showing you a rather nice piece of silk. Anyway, something for those of you who are interested, as I say, in rare wines. It's a wonderfully, if you look at the colour of this wine, it's wonderfully deep. I'll put it against the label there, so perhaps you'll be able to see it a little bit better. Deep purple-black, incredible density in concentration there, and this incredible multi-layered character that you get from the old vines. The great thing about old vines, as I'm sure you know, is that they have enormous volume of wood, and so they can store energy from one year to the next. So the year after the harvest, they still have stored up energy from the previous year. And the other advantage of the old vines is that they have a very extensive root network of roots. And this means that in very dry years, like in 2017, which was a very, very hot dry year, the old vines tend to fare better than the young ones. So 2017 Old Vines Serikos Vintage Port is actually quite a remarkable wine. And so I'm going to raise my glass to you. Thank you for joining us. I hope you'll have the opportunity of joining us again soon. Good health.